Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another IMCO with myself, Jonathan Chan. So glad that you can join me today as we talk about what topped the news this past week and offer you my Christian opinion. Now, if this is your first IMCO, well, welcome. Glad you can join me. IMCO basically is an acronym for In My Christian Opinion, and what I do each week on a Wednesday is to reflect upon what topped the news this past week, what stuck out for me, and as a Christian, how should I approach it or even think about it? Well, anyways, let's go. What topped the news this past week? Well, it's the first time actually for myself, is the whole phrase of emergency act. Yes, our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, enacted or invoked the Emergency Act in response to the ongoing Freedom Convoy protest. Now, for some of you who don't know, I'm just included some pictures here as a slideshow. Some of these folks are blocking the border. Some of these folks are blocking the bridge. But recently, they cleared out due to the Emergency Act. So they're blocking trade routes, causing havoc, spray painting swastikas around, waving them around, waving around Confederate flags. Now, some of them are, not all of them. And of course, honking their horns like late at night. Now, some of them, not all of them, again. And some of them are carrying firearms. And recently in Alberta, the RCMP confiscated a bunch of firearms, ammunitions, etc. Now, again, some of them, not all of them. I have to qualify that because I received a few comments on the bottom of my YouTube page and also on my Facebook saying that some folks insist they're not all idiots. Okay, well, anyways, that's a whole other conversation. The whole thing about associations, I don't know. It's like me being Asian, Chinese specifically, and I noticed that some of us are poor drivers, but then I cannot say to somebody that, oh, I'm not like that Chinese guy, right? You can't say that. Or I'm not that kind of Christian. You can't, because it just brings out that whole idea of separating yourself from your own people and your own peers, and it's just not right. And that's a whole other conversation. There's a few articles written on that topic as well. But anyways, let's move on. Emergency Act. It was invoked by our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau recently. And when it was invoked, it was interesting because I received quite a few emails in my inbox. It was spam mail, basically, from Christian organizations telling us pastors to pray and hopefully that God will prevail, and that this emergency act will be defeated, and that Trudeau will be dethroned from being a prime minister, etc., etc. And I'm reading this and I just can't stomach it. It was just sick to the stomach for myself. Now, I don't know about you, for the listeners out there, some of you may agree with them that, you should pray and that you would get rid of the prime minister. But for me, that's just ridiculous. However, that got me thinking. Oh, by the way, for those of you who are curious about the Emergency Act and what it entails, it's actually at the bottom here. I listed it on the link below. So check that out if you want to read more on the Emergency Act and what that entails. So I'm receiving these emails, right, from these so-called Christian organizations. Some of them are actually all in a different language than I could understand, such as Korean or something. But anyways, they've been sending them to me, and some of them are my circle of friends too, and which kind of baffles me a bit. But you know what? Everybody has a right of their opinion. But to pray that we should not submit to authorities, that got me thinking. Because in the Bible, in the New Testament, especially in Romans, there's a particular chapter, and I'm just going to throw it out there, chapter 13. Paul mentions to the folks, whoever he was writing to, which is still debatable, he's writing to his people saying that you have to submit to authorities. Huh. That's odd. So it got me thinking even more. And yes, I think a lot. And so I've been having a chat with myself. Okay, as a Christian, how should we see authority? Because yes, ultimately we need to submit to God. But how about our current governments? And how about those governments who are really bad? Not Trudeau. I'm talking about, like, case in point, some parts of the world where these governments are corrupt, where these governments practice fascism, dictatorships, where these governments disguise themselves as if they are democracies, but really they're not. They're just maneuvering and making sure that there's no opponents to go against them. Case in point, there's a particular president in a particular country right now who just withdrew or may withdraw his troops from Ukraine, from the Ukrainian border, who has a history of poisoning his opponents, even though he claims that his country is democratic. So, in light of whether the governments are bad or good, however you define that, in light of corrupt governments or governments that may have a heavy hand at times, how should Christians see these authorities when we actually ultimately need to submit to God as our ultimate authority? Because these Christian organizations are basically telling me, since God is our authority, these governments are not. So let's pray and hope that God will dethrone them. Okay, let's go. Here are my takeaways for today. So, submission to authority. Let's start off with Romans 13. Because I figure it is good, because since I referenced it, it is good for me to read it to you as the watcher, or for those who are listening on podcasts, to listen to these passages. It's found in Romans chapter 13, verse 1 to 7, and I'll be reading in the New International Version. Now, some of you, I know, will probably post in the comments, which you have done for my sermons, that you don't like the versions I read. Well, tough beans for you, because I'm going to choose NIV and you can't stop me. Anyway, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes. For the authorities are God's servants, who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. It's interesting that Paul doesn't even just leave it as taxes. He doesn't even leave it as business income. He talks about if you got to pay them respect, and also you got to give them honor. Okay, full stop. That's the passage now. So let's go back to authority. For Canada, for us Canadians, for those who are watching elsewhere, yes, I am a Canadian, and I live in Vancouver, British Columbia. Well, Burnaby, British Columbia, but who knows about Burnaby? It's usually just one major city in BC, that's Vancouver. So in Canada, we have this thing called the rule of law, where governments below it cannot go willy-nilly and think that they could control everything and do whatever they like. No, they also have to submit to the ultimate authority, which is the rule of law, by the way, which is also held and stewarded and kept in check by our Supreme Court, our judges, who are supposed to be nonpartisan and, there's another for this, unbiased on anything, because their sole purpose is to make sure that the rule of law governs the government, that the government cannot go willy-nilly. So, thank God we live in a country that has a rule of law, that the government is not above the rule of law. Because if you look at some countries, namely China, there is no rule of law. Whatever that guy says, it goes. And so there's no such thing. He believes that he is the rule of law. All right, next point. So basically, for practical reasons and to not completely think of this in a spiritual sense, practically, we as Canadians are governed by the rule of law. Full stop. It doesn't matter what government is in power. It doesn't matter if it's the provincial government in power. Everybody has to be submit to the rule of law. No questions asked. Second, now we come into this passage I read to you. Now, in Paul's day, Paul is not saying that it's sunshine and rainbows with the governing authorities in his time. If you know your history, during Paul's day, there were two Caesars that were notable of being insane. The latter one is Nero. Remember him? He's the one who blamed the Christians for lighting up Rome in fire. And hence it followed that he persecuted the Christians because he wanted the Christians to be his scapegoat. Where really, consequently, it was his fault for that massive fire in Rome. Anyway, case in point, back to the point, in Paul's day, the governing authorities were not that great. They weren't stellar. They were not honest. They didn't have integrity. In fact, they only favored the elite. They were favoring the rich and wealthy people because, hey, that's what they believed in. And if you ever looked at classical Greek history and Greek literature, the various philosophers really criticized Rome for being materialistic and just think that you just cater to the elite. So the Caesars in Paul's day were not that great, yet Paul wrote chapter 13, verse 1 to 7, where he tells people, Christians, to submit to authority because God instituted these systems in place. Now, why would he do that? Why would he say that in light of this corrupt government, in this corrupt authority? Why submit to this authority? Well, we have to know Paul and we have to know our Christian ethos as well. What is our main goal when we're here? What is our calling? All of our callings. It doesn't matter where you're from or who you are or what ethnicity. If you subscribe to Christianity, what is ultimately our calling? It is to be a light to the nations, to reflect Jesus everywhere. In other words, to sum up, mission. Now, I'm not saying that mission is all about preaching the gospel with words, because we all know that effective communication is only 10% verbal. 90% of effective communication is nonverbal. And so it's more about our actions here. And that's what Paul, I think, has it in mind too. Because throughout Paul's letters, all of Paul's letters, including Acts, what do we see of Paul? We see Paul missionally minded. That regardless of what's in front of him or who's in front of him, he tries to, in his own actions, proclaim the gospel, not just with words, but with his actions. So, if taking donations may jeopardize the whole missional aspect of proclaiming the gospel and reaching out to people and being a light to nations and saying that, to reveal Jesus' love to people, if taking donations hinder that, compromise that message, well, guess what he did? What he said? He didn't take donations. He stopped it. Instead, he got to work. He went and became a tent maker. But then if there were times, like for instance, the church at Philippi, where they were really generous and wanted to give him donations, well, he took it anyway because, hey, they were more willing to give. So he was contextual. He knew exactly the audience that he was dealing with. And he knew that actions spoke louder than words. And so he said this because he had mission in mind. In other words, don't be a douchebag. Don't disobey the law just for the sake of disobeying the law. We have to make sure that whatever we do, whether it be protests, whether it be disagreeing with the government, whether it be chiming in like me doing this IMCO, whether it be doing rants on our social media or just writing things to our governments, we have to keep in mind that for Christians, it's our mission. We have to be missional. Is what I'm doing missional? Is what I'm doing revealing Jesus' love to people? Or am I just doing it for the sake of doing it because I just don't like the guy and disagree with him? right? I hope you follow me on this. Because for the protests, there are many protests out there. There are environmental protests. There are protests. We just saw the Women's March, which I completely agree to take down that stupid statue. It's been a long time coming. And I agree with many of the protests with regards to gender equity and equality. Now, why? It's because these protests do support and promote gospel values. It promotes exactly what Jesus wanted to promote and desired to promote, that saying that his love reaches to everyone because God so loved the entire world that Jesus died for us. That's why I support these things. That's why I support gender equity. That's why I support the environment, because we are supposed to be good stewards of this planet anyway. That is the gospel value. But for protests that promote hate, for protests that invade these union gospel missions and these places where we're supposed to provide shelter and demand food from them, for protests to destroy livelihoods because a lot of people were stuck at home and couldn't get to work, or for those who were in the car manufacturing business, they were stuck doing nothing and didn't get paid for it. Do those protests promote gospel values? And in my opinion, it doesn't. And so for those Christian organizations, so-called Christian organizations, this message is to you. You emailed me saying to pray so that God could take down this government. Well, I'm sorry. But for me, for all things, I think what he has done, what Justin Trudeau has done, is actually appropriate. It's quite appropriate. Because in my view, we need to think more and beyond ourselves for this one. We need to see that these actions that these protesters are doing are not missional at all. They do not promote gospel values at all, because there is no love in it. It's all about me, me, me. And so, back to the point about submission to authority. We submit to governing authorities, no matter how bad they are, in light of, for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of the mission of promoting and propagating the gospel and promoting Jesus' love to everyone. However, we Christians should also take active stances and engagement in the most appropriate way to make sure that we still love our neighbors and that the gospel is promoted when the gospel values are compromised, when there's exploitation on women, when there's abuses done on indigenous women, when there's abuses done on the environment. We Christians need to stand by those because those align with our gospel values. And through our actions, that's when the gospel is preached. That's it from me. I know some of you may disagree vehemently. Feel free to disagree with me. Chime in on the bottom of the comments page, either in the YouTube, podcast on SoundCloud, or even on my website, or shoot me an email through my website. You know where it is. It will come shortly right after this. But thank you for joining me on another IMCO. Till next week, have a blessed week.